so bad. Right, okay.
What you meant.
We knew what we meant.
And
Great.
no, I would like to introduce this episode of the History with Hilbert podcast. And today I am joined by the lovely Grace, who is a friend of mine, and also I've been forbidden from using the word colleague, but she also studies Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic in Cambridge. Although unlike me, who is a veteran at this point, gone through 2 years, she's still, a sprightly young first year. How have you found your first year at Cambridge? It's been a weird year, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'm still a bit of a baby in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, it's been amazing. The ASNC department is just brilliant. And it's just a shame that it's been cut short by you know what, which I shall not name. But yeah.
Ye olde Rona. Yeah, it is a shame. Like that and the strikes, I think the combination of the two has really kind of put a dampener on the year in a way. But you do what you can. Online lectures are quite fun, especially with Pauline Naismith.
Yeah, I was going to say what I would say is that the community, the ASNC department, has just really come together, whether that's between the students and also the lecturers as well. We have great lecturers like Rory and Eric and Richard Dance, who are just brilliant and have made it more enjoyable by being their entertaining and charismatic selves on Zoom, which has been quite an experience.
Absolutely. No, I think they've pulled together well. But anyway, let's move on to what we wanted to talk about today. And I guess the first question I should ask is, how did you get into the whole world of ASNC? And ASNC, by the way, we're going to probably use the term a fair amount, is Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic. It's the undergraduate course that we study at the University of Cambridge, and ultimately how we met. How did you get into that? What sparked your interest?
Yeah, so Æthelflad, and I think to a certain extent some people might know that if they've clicked on this video. When I was 13, so quite young, I was watching a documentary about Æthelflad, and it was by the wonderful Michael Wood, who is just a brilliant lecturer and speaker on the Anglo-Saxon period. And I was really inspired by Æthelflad's story about how she was a warrior leader, but also a really skilled politician and a woman, a powerful woman in that time when it was dominated by male figures. And so yes, I just wanted to know more about Æthelflad, and through that I discovered Old English and manuscripts and thought, this is really what I want to find out about and research. And especially as she wasn't well known at the time, I just wanted to find out more about this mysterious figure, and so that's why I'm here.
Great. I mean, she is a very captivating figure, because I think probably of all the women from the Anglo-Saxon period, she's got to be the most famous. If you ask anyone to name a queen from the Anglo-Saxon period, I think she is the kind of go-to that we tend to think about. And I think she is really extraordinary in what she did, in what she accomplished, and also her reputation that came afterwards of what she did. So I think she is a very interesting character in that regard. What did you make, because we're both avid fans of The Last Kingdom, what did you make of her kind of, generally speaking, her interpretation in The Last Kingdom, how she was acted out by Millie Brady?
Well, I thought Millie Brady did an excellent job of portraying Æthelflad, but personally I would have liked to have seen more of an independence exerted on her part. It annoyed me slightly that she, especially in the first 2/3 of season 4, that she seems mainly to be Uhtred's love interest, when actually she's an interesting character in her own right. And if you look at the ratio of women that appear in the show in their own right compared to women who appear in the show because they're Uhtred's love interest, it's pretty skewed towards the latter. So that was just a bit annoying. That I understood it, that it's for entertainment value and it makes it interesting, but equally I felt that it undermined Æthelflad's power as this independent woman. But also I would have liked to have seen more, and hopefully if they make a season 5, I would like to see this in the next series, that more of political power in terms of being a charismatic leader and respected by her followers, in terms of, we had lots of scenes that I thought were really good this season with Edward, where he's using verbal warfare against the ealdormen of Mercia, and it would be nice to see that sort of wordplay being used by Æthelflad and showing her intelligence, because that's how she's remembered in Saxon chronicles, but also in Anglo-Norman documents, as being a wise and learned leader who men, even though she's a woman, they are really happy for her to lead them. And especially as being Alfred the Great's, beloved first daughter, she would have been educated and brought up in the court, and Alfred knew the power of educating her so that she was willing to participate in government. So that's something that I would like to see more of. This a representation of her as being a powerful political figure as well as a warrior leader.
Yeah, I think that'll be. I did miss that during the season because I was thinking that kind of in the first few episodes where she is mainly sort of Uhtred's love interest, I was thinking then there'll be a transition from that into her becoming this astute political leader. She's called the Lady of the Mercians for a reason, and we know from the Chronicle and from lack of attestations that Aethelflaed, who was her husband, and probably not actually that bad a guy, that he was kind of knocked out potentially from some kind of wound that he got in battle quite early on. And so she was probably the one that was doing a lot of the leading and the mustering of the troops and things. Whether she was an active warrior on the front line is another question, but I was hoping that there would be that kind of transition of her really being in a position of power and controlling things, because that is the image that we get when we look at Mercia at the time. So it was a bit of a shame that didn't really occur, and hopefully we will get to see that.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting that they did, when they had the scenes of her being a warrior and actually being in the battle. On the one hand, I thought, okay, great, woo, warrior, girl power, woo, and on the other hand, I thought, oh no, because it seems highly unlikely that she would have actually been in the battle, and it's almost as if the directors or the writers have thought, right, okay, we need a powerful female figure. How are we going to show that? Oh, we'll make her a warrior and put her into the battle. Whereas actually you can show her strength and her intelligence and her power over other characters using words and in those political intrigue type scenes, which actually I think I find more interesting to watch than the battle scenes.
I think, if anything, that's going to be more historically accurate, because obviously at the moment there's a lot of debate, especially with regards to Viking women, so women from Scandinavia in the period, about whether they took an active role in combat or not, with a lot of evidence going for and against on either side. But I think the Anglo-Saxon society is a very different one to the Scandinavian society. So this is a debate removed. So I think it will be very unlikely that she would be, an active frontline warrior. That doesn't mean that she wasn't a commander of some sort, that she wasn't, raising the fjord, because that was a whole administrative to do. You had to actually get people out and to fight and to motivate them. And I think she probably played a leading role in that, which would explain why she was so loved by the Mercians, why she's remembered as the Lady of the Mercians in that regard. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame that the show doesn't go in on that more, because the show really it follows the line that's similar in Vikings, that is, if women are powerful, they have to be powerful in exactly the same way as men. But I don't think that's entirely the case. And historically speaking, I think women were wielders of power a lot of the time from behind the scenes, and that's maybe why we don't hear about it so much in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is all about kings and power and battles. And that's not really the sphere of influence that I think women were in the most, whereas you can see very well in the character of Aelfwynn that she pulls the strings behind the scenes and is incredibly influential and important for Alfred and for Edward as well.
Yeah, definitely. And this is what's fascinating about Æthelflad, is that she seems like she has quite kingly roles and masculine roles, in the sense that she would have been the commander of armies, and like you said, that she would have called up the fjords, and she had the diplomatic power of a king. She made alliances with the Scots, for example, and for example, in 918, which I think is something that's quite remarkable, in Leicester, the Mercians took Leicester, which is where the army of the Vikings was based, and they submitted to her without fighting, and then chose Æthelflad as their lord, not even as a queen or a lady or figure, but she's actually a female lord. I mean, the word Hlafdia, Mission Hlafdia, the Lady of the Mercians, that comes from Hlavod. They had to make up a new name for her, as it were, because she wasn't exactly a queen as well, because of the complicated relationships between Wessex and Mercia at the time.
I think that is really interesting that they come up with a new term especially to describe that, and the fact that she is on her own with the Scots, as you say, and also with the Northumbrians, that she managed to cement this. And if it hadn't have been for the coming over from Ireland of another group of Hiberno-Norse Vikings at the time, then who knows what the history would have been. But potentially Northumbria would have then submitted to Æthelflad, and it might have sort of shifted the balance of power in a way. And ultimately that didn't happen because she died fairly soon. I think that was in 916, 917, and then she dies fairly soon after that.
Yeah, in
But it is
19.
very interesting.
Yeah.
So another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and which you kind of touched on earlier, is about the role that Mercia plays in the relationship between Mercia and Wessex. Because I've already complained about this in my video about Edward the Elder, that the relationship is interpreted in a certain way, which potentially isn't as supported by the historical facts. What's your kind of take on how it's portrayed in the show?
Yeah, but it just frustrated me that Edward is adamant that he doesn't want his sister on the throne of Mercia, and I just felt like screaming, "Can't you see that would be such an advantage to have Æthelflad ruling in Mercia?" Because if you look at what Æthelflad did with Edward, they worked together, whether that was through their program of borough building, that they strengthened Mercia and Wessex through cooperation and defended their borders, and their kingdoms, and especially as Æthelflad was willing to participate in government. It's not like she's an amateur and doesn't know what she's doing. That would have just been great for Edward, because he can look after Wessex and then Mercia can look after Mercia, whilst at the same time they know they have that strong alliance together.
And a lot of the time, if you look at the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, you see that it records that the West Saxon and the Mercian army were fighting, together, that they came together to engage in different conflicts, like at Tettenhall, for example, and that there are kind of these zones of warfare. That with the conquest of the Danelaw, you had Edward going into East Anglia, and then you had from Eastern Mercia, Western Mercia, which was still under the control of Ethelred and Æthelfled, they were pushing into Eastern Mercia and taking that from the Danes that were there and attacking the more northerly cities in the five boroughs, like you mentioned, with the submission of Leicester. And I think they also stormed Derby together as well,
Yes.
Ethelred and Æthelfled. So there's clear signs of coordination between the two. Whereas I think in the show they kind of, I think it's a bit conflicted in the show. They sort of show Mercia as really trying to go its own way and Edward trying to dominate it, but I don't think there's much evidence for that in the early period. I think there's much more evidence for a more equal relationship between the two, that they were working together, and it's only after Æthelflaed's death that this kind of switches and Edward power grabs in Mercia, essentially. Well, that's one interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great to see in the future if there's going to be another series. I think there was one scene that they showed in, I think, one of the latter episodes, that they said, "Oh, let's send a joint army and it shows that we're united." And I thought, great, just do more of that, because it doesn't take away from the drama by showing that they're now going to be cooperating with each other. And I understand that it heightens the drama and the plot interest, but it also just undermines Edward's credibility as a leader as well, because he was a great leader, and that would be interesting to see whether he grows and matures in the future, because I did quite like that interpretation that he's not quite come to his maturity as a king. That's why he's making these mistakes. However, it was still very frustrating to watch.
I feel like my main frustration is with the portrayal of Edward, and yours is more towards Æthelfled from what I've understood. I think my main gripe with it is that a lot of the things that are being portrayed, at the time Edward was sort of dealing with internal issues. So with the church, there was church reform going on. He had a particularly annoying archbishop that he was dealing with at the time, and he was sort of getting the internal structures of Wessex in order. But there's no real evidence that he was struggling in a big way, and that the Danes were invading and that they took Winchester. It's completely fanciful, and actually it's Edward that goes on the offensive.
Yeah, the siege of Winchester. I thought, oh no, goodness sake. But actually, something that is really interesting in the real life relationship between Æthelflad and Edward is that so Edward obviously had the Wessex Chronicle, which records his deeds, and that completely whitewashes Æthelflad. They don't mention Æthelflad at all and what she did in Mercia. But then what's really interesting is Æthelflad then commissions her own history and commissions the Annals of Æthelflad in the Mercian Register, and that systematically excludes Edward as much as Edward's excluded sister, which is so interesting that they've both decided to focus on their own rule. And it wasn't just Edward doing the classic let's get rid of the woman. It's actually Æthelflad recognizing that she needs to cement her own strength and power as well.
That is interesting, because I think on the one hand you could see it as kind of a whitewashing of Æthelfled, that Edward's only recording his own accomplishments. But I think if you look at a lot of the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, they're kind of very much written in the political interests of the people writing it at the time. So I don't know if we should interpret that in that way, or if we should just see it as, well, of course, the people who are writing the annals for Edward are going to write it, bigging up Edward because it's his annal. Whereas if it's a Mercian one, it's going to big up the Lady of the Mercians because it's that kind of pride,
Really enjoyed the last episode, or was it the last episode where he's like really emotional because he's like, my children are inside Winchester. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but also, I don't know, the last episode really annoyed me, like, because Edward was really good at warfare. Like, he's probably even better at it than Alfred, because if you read the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Alfred's always making deals with them and like, okay, do you promise to become a Christian? Do you promise to not attack? And they're like, yeah, I promise. And like 2 weeks later, they're burning Cornwall to the ground. But Edward doesn't take any of that. He's just, he lays down the law, and that's that. And he doesn't make deals with them. Or when he does make a deal with them, he doesn't trust them. I can't remember which year it was, but there is a it's in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle that he never pays them either to leave, but they go off. He strikes this deal, but he still fortifies the coastline, and lo and behold, they attack, and all the Danes are killed when they attack. So he's a lot more clever in that regard, and I think that's because he learned from Alfred's mistakes, from not having two field armies, than that some Danes were able to get away. I think that was something that Edward learned from a lot more. So it does annoy me in The Last Kingdom when it shows him as being really rash and indecisive, because I think that's the opposite of what he was from what we can tell. Like, he wouldn't have conquered that much of the Danelaw if he was an incompetent military leader.
Yeah, especially there was the scene where Uhtred is just waiting outside of Winchester planning what to do, and then all of a sudden Edward just charges straight towards the gates, and you think, oh no, why are you doing that? And then Uhtred, goes through the crowd and is like, Edward, my lord, stop what you're doing. And then Edward just completely is incensed and just ignores Uhtred, and I think, come on, mate.
Yeah, it's very frustrating from a historical point of view. Like, at the same time, it's a show set in history. It's not obliged to be completely historically accurate, but I think it is reinforcing at the same time sort of a lot of stereotypes about the period, especially in how they dressed the Danes, like just in bits of dead animal, just with fur, covered in fur. And
yes, I do actually want to talk about this, the edginess of the show. And just it would be very beneficial, maybe not necessarily on The Last Kingdom, but if there was a TV show that accurately represented what it would have looked like in Anglo-Saxon England, because everyone knows in the latter Middle Ages what it looked like in terms of knights, princesses, castles, jousting. It's really easy to conjure up those images, but with Anglo-Saxon England, it's really hard because we just don't really know what it looked like. And I was talking to some of my friends about this who do ASNC, and we were saying that we always think about it as being quite a slow, muddy, mucky time, when actually it probably had its beauty as well. And programs like The Last Kingdom could be really good for giving Anglo-Saxon England its kind of the beauty that it deserves, as it were. And like the craftsmanship, there are really beautiful objects that have been found. So if you look at the Sutton Hoo burial, or even Alfred's Astles that were produced alongside his translation program, these jewels, the craftsmanship and the colours on those are still so vibrant and beautiful, even though they're thousands of years old. And that's something that is the costume designer could have had a great time looking at that and making those costumes really beautiful, when actually it just seems quite edgy. What really annoys me is Æthelflad's earrings. They just look like they bought them from Accessorize. They're just kind of a gold hoop, and you think, but you could have made that beautiful, and lots of jewels, and really a testimony to the craftsmanship that was available in Anglo-Saxon England. Likewise, there's
maybe that's why the relationship failed between her and Uhtred, because he just bought her cheap earrings from Accessorize,
No, but also likewise, there's a real absence of belt buckles and like shoulder clasps, which is what we find a lot of in graves of the period. And I think Edward wears a couple on his blue tunic that he wears, but apart from that, there's not really any in sight.
It is frustrating because we do have a fair amount of material of the material culture that remains to us from archaeological digs, so from the period. So it's not like we don't know what they were wearing. And actually, people really took care of their appearance back then, especially people higher up in society. You know, grooming was a major thing, certainly for the Danes, which is what I find the most frustrating, is that the Danes seem to be, they're covered in fur, they're huge, they're always muddy, and they have dreadlocks. And I think it couldn't be further from the truth, because actually, if anything, the Danes were probably cleaner than the Anglo-Saxons. And actually, there's I can't remember if it was, I think Aelfwynn's letter says that, you know, Englishmen were copying Danish hairstyles and that this was a terrible sin to God. And other accounts are lamenting the fact that English women were always going off with Danish men because they were so much cleaner than the Anglo-Saxons, because they were well groomed. And actually, and on a lot of archaeological digs in Scandinavian contexts where we find the Danes coming over, and Norwegians, etc., and Swedes, you find that there's these kind of vanity kits, you know, with things to put between your teeth and to clean your teeth with, and combs are incredibly important. There's a whole comb trade of reindeer antler that spreads from Scandinavia, as well as, you know, picks for lice and things like this. So they were really clean. They really took care of their appearance, and there's no evidence that the Vikings had dreadlocks. I just find it
Yeah.
incredibly weird to see.
Yeah, yeah, which is, it's strange, this disparity between how the Vikings are portrayed in media, whether that's in Vikings or the Last Kingdom, and then actually what they were like. And most of them as well were peaceful settlers. They're not all marauding invaders, and that's why I think that it would be really beneficial to have a program that represented accurately what England at this time would have looked like, with lots of different communities, not necessarily thinking, oh, we're Viking, we're Saxon, but rather having smaller parochial identities that varied in different parts of England.
I think that's a really good point, because by this time in the season, I think we're about sort of 912, 913 at this time in the season, because let me think, Aethelflaed dies in about 910, is it 912?
Yeah,
In
9/11.
around then,
Yeah.
911. Because by that time, you know, the Danes invaded in 865, so they've been in England for a long time by this point, and there were lots of families, we can assume, from the Danes that came and settled. Like, you can read it in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle that Halfdan came to Northumbria and shared out the land, and they were putting it under the plough. So there's textual evidence, as well as, of course, linguistic evidence in a lot of the northern dialects, and indeed in a lot of standard English as well, that there's Old Norse words. So, you know, we have solid evidence there were Danes that came and settled here. And actually, it's very likely that most of them will have been into mixed families of Anglo-Saxons and Scandinavians that came over. You know, there is this huge distinction in the show between Dane and Saxon. And okay, another thing that annoys me while we're talking about this is the fact that Uhtred is always like, I'm half Saxon, half Dane. But if he's from Northumbria, he's not a Saxon, he's an Angle, because it was the Angles that settled there rather than the Saxons. So it's this kind of clear-cut black and white. And that's not to say that there weren't identities that were Anglo-Saxon and Danish, that there were differences between them in material culture and identity. That clearly is the case. But that's not to say that there wasn't a lot of fluidity between the two, and that when people came over, they started to express a new identity between them. And that's what you can see in the metalwork from the Danelaw, or in the stone sculptures from the Danelaw, and other things. And certainly in the language, even though there's very little attested from this period, from later periods, if you look at Middle English, there's an awful lot of Old Norse words there, and indeed in dialect as well. So in my Northumbrian dialect, you were having a laugh at that earlier, Grace. There's a lot of words that come from Old Norse, and some of the sounds might have been retained because of that connection to Old Norse and Old Norse speakers who came in and then learned Old English, and that's then survived in a lot of Northern dialect words.
Yeah, you mentioned the fusion between these two cultures, and that's actually something that we see when the Saxons first come into England, and they communicate with the Britons and fuse together their cultures. It wasn't just, you know, the Arthurian tradition that it was the Britons were pushed into Wales and there was lots of fighting between the Saxons and the Britons, and it was the deadly enemies, that actually there was this cultural exchange. There's a really remarkable a stone cross that was found in a gravesite, and it's called the Oakington cuneiform cross, I think, and it's done in the Saxon style, but it's made from a British technique using enamel. So it shows these two tribes almost actually not away from each other, but fused together and talking and trading with each other. And yeah, it's never a clear cut, okay, they hated each other and didn't talk to each other, and it's, you're either one or the other, because the tapestry of heritage is much more rich than that.
I think that's a good point, because I think it's easy to look back today in kind of the post nation state era in a way, and to think, I'm Dutch, you're English, we're different. But I think back then, before nationalities were really a thing, during this time, that there wasn't yet an England, there wasn't yet, Denmark hadn't been unified yet, Norway hadn't been. Norway might have been unified under Harold Fairhair, but that's a bit of a difficult one. But these identities, I think, were much more difficult to comprehend than now. And I think you raise a good point that it's similar to when the Anglo-Saxons came in to England. The traditional narrative, if you read Gildas and if you look at Bede, and even in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, it documents it, is that they came in, they slaughtered the Britons. The Britons went to Wales and to Brittany, and that's the end. But actually, it's a much more complex story if you look at the ground. The example from stonework is great, because it's very similar to what we see with Anglo-Scandinavian stonework, is that there was hardly any stonework in Scandinavia, and yet when they came over to England in the later 9th century and the early 10th century, there is stonework with Scandinavian motifs. You've got the Malmön style on there. Later on, you get the Jellinger style as well. And these are Scandinavian styles that we find from later periods in Scandinavia appearing earlier in England. And you get a kind of hybrid style that is kind of Scandinavian, but not really typical for Scandinavia, but also has Anglo-Saxon features. And we assume it's Anglo-Saxons who are actually carving it, because most of the carving was occurring in an ecclesiastical context. So there's a lot of stone carving from Northumbria from the Anglo-Saxon period, like the Ruthle cross or the Bewcastle cross, which I highly recommend you go and see, by the way. They're a bit of a trek away. One's in Bewcastle's in Cumbria, I think, and Ruthle is in Dumfriesshire, but there's also a copy of it in the museum in London, but really worth seeing. But those are all pre-Anglo-Scandinavian stone sculptures. But it's interesting that there is this melding, this fusion of the two. And I think it's a shame we don't really see more of that in the Last Kingdom, because I think by this time there's a clear context for this kind of mixed culture, especially in the Danelaw. But we don't really get that. We just kind of get unwashed, dreadlock-wearing hippie Danes.
Yeah, actually, a point. Going back into this.
Yeah.
What was interesting to see in the programme is I felt that Æthelflad could have exerted her independence and her authority a bit more, because it felt almost like Edith towards the end of the series was more independent and more in control of what she wanted to do than Æthelflad. I think in particular the scene that stands out is when Edith is talking to her brother and really challenging him, when the Wessex gang have been cornered by this pond and there's loads of reeds. You know the one I'm talking about, and she says, "Oh, actually,
Yeah.
you murdered Ethelred." And it was quite frustrating that Æthelflad didn't have a sort of big revelatory scene like that, and didn't really show her power as a charismatic leader or someone who was clever with words. So, for example, there's, I think in about episode 5 or so, there's a scene where she begs Edward and she says, "Please don't use Aelfwynn as a bargaining tool. She's only a child. I don't want her married as a child." And she's literally begging Edward. And I think Athelhelm has a line where he says something along the lines of, "Oh, it doesn't suit a lady to beg." And it's just highly improbable that actually happened, because of the fact that Æthelflad and Edward were brother and sister and respected each other as political leaders and political figures, but also Æthelflad was a diplomatic politician, and she also knew what had to be done and knew how to negotiate, and so it just undermined her credibility that she was forced to beg Edward for this. and then which leads to Edward imprisoning her in the chapel. And I thought, oh no. But on the other hand, I see why they do it, because it makes good TV. It was an interesting plot line to watch, which added drama. But then you have to look at, does that outweigh her credibility as a historical figure, or what does that do to her character, along the lines of being a strong female character?
I do think they really missed the trick with that, because they could have had a great set of scenes of Æthelflad that maybe initially, people were skeptical, and they didn't, particularly think that she could do it, or they could unite the Mercians, but then that she does, and there could be, this great scene, I don't know, where she's riding on a horse and she's rallying them and all this kind of thing, but there just wasn't. It was she sort of went off, was it, I mean, she sent someone off to Wales to go and get Welsh help, which didn't actually happen. At this point, it's a later battle where they do fight with the Welsh, but that didn't happen yet. It's not her kind of coming into her own right, and I think that's the cool thing about Æthelflad, is that that's what she did, but they don't really acknowledge that in the show. I don't know, and I think the acting was great, so I'm not going to pin this on the actor, but I feel like I don't know, I feel like her character was a little bit dead in the season. She didn't really do much. I was kind of waiting for the big, here I am, come and get me.
Commentary. Yeah, exactly.
But it just didn't really happen.
Yeah, and I thought that maybe after Uhtred and Æthelflad say goodbye, and she says, I'm going to be the lady of the Mercians. I thought maybe then they would focus more on Æthelflad, but it doesn't. It kind of does this weird, almost. Everyone goes off to their different areas, and you think, oh, is that the end, before it goes up into the big siege of Winchester, and that was then focused on Edward, and then Æthelflad kind of comes in at the end. I didn't really feel that it was then. They could have used that as an opportunity to look at Æthelflad and her leadership, and then what she did in Mercia, whereas that just didn't really happen, and it was focused on Edward and the siege of Winchester.
What do you hope is going to happen in the next season? So we've kind of talked about this season, what from a historical point of view we thought could have been better, and maybe from a script writing point of view. But what would you really love to see happen with Æthelflad in the next season with her and Edward?
Ooh, cooperation, just showing cooperation between Edward and Æthelflad, and both of them as competent leaders, and it would just be great to see Æthelflad being shown not only as a military leader, but also as a politician, and just her really coming into her own, because as a historical character, she deserves that. That was what Æthelflad was so cool in real life, and she was really independent, and there was no one else really like her in Anglo-Saxon history, on a par with her, and yeah, I don't think that would undermine what Uhtred is doing at all, because they're two very different characters, and so I would just like to see more maturity and more control, because it does also feel that it feels like Æthelflad and also Edward are kind of in their early 20s or something, which the actors are, but it feels like they haven't quite reached their maturity in terms of being political leaders. And so it'd be great to see them actually later on having had a secure hold on their kingdoms, and having seen Æthelflad defeating the Vikings. I
think that's a good point, because for Æthelflad it's kind of now or never, because spoilers, but she's going to be dead in a few years' time, so it's kind of like they don't have that much time to play with. And Edward doesn't have that much longer. Okay, granted, he has a bit longer than Æthelflad, but it's kind of like this is when they were in their prime. They had been. I mean, Æthelflad was already, and Edward were already, getting involved in battles and political maneuvering and everything during the end of Alfred's reign in the 890s. So it's like that. If anything, this should have been happening then. That they weren't particularly suited to rule, and they didn't exactly get the political intrigue and everything. But by this point, as we're getting it through the first decade of the 10th century, that they've already done this for a while. Like, they're not new to this game, but I think it kind of shows that they are complete noobs in a way, which is a little bit frustrating.
From as early as, I think, in the Mercian Register, from as early as 901, there's evidence of Æthelflad establishing boroughs, or refortifying ones that have been involved in conflict, and that was when Æthelred was still alive. And when she died, she was in her mid-40s, which is just incredible that she achieved all of that. I mean, I think that the the climax of what she was doing just before she died was in the summer of 918, when, as I said earlier, the Vikings in Leicester submitted to her without fighting, choosing her as their lord. But also in York, she'd received oaths and pledges from the Vikings there, which is just phenomenal.
It really is amazing to think about, especially for a society that obviously didn't that valued men and women in a different way, certainly to how we do today. I think it really is an incredible achievement, and I think they don't. I don't know. I feel like they don't really approach it in the right way in the show, at least how I would approach it. But then again, the show, it can do what it wants, because as much as I enjoy history and as much as I would love to see a more historical approach taken to the series, at the end of the day, do you think that they have a responsibility to portray things as accurately as possible, or do you think that's a secondary issue?
That it's so interesting, because I think if we were in the television world, we would probably say, oh, the focus is more on entertainment and it has to be what makes people watch the program. But as historians and as students, we can sit here and say, no, but it has to be historically accurate, and actually at the end of the day, I think that TV companies and Netflix would say, okay, we don't really care if it's not accurate, because this is a fictional take on it, as it were. Whereas I think what would really be the problem is if the Last Kingdom said, right, okay, we're going to be a kind of historical drama / documentary at the same time, that if they were saying, right, this really happened, then that's when there would be a problem. And whilst it is really frustrating for us that they say that it's based on real life history and there are so many flaws in it, we can't really say, oh, dear Netflix, this is unacceptable, because then they would just say, oh no, but it's entertainment. So
right. That's a good point, because it is a bit of a balance, and this is something that whenever I make a video about a program that's set in a period of history, I always get comments of, who cares, it's just a program. And that is completely fine. You're completely entitled to that opinion, and that is fair enough. But yeah, I'm always curious as to what other people think about that. In a way, I do understand that it's a drama, and it's based on the series of books, of course, by Bernard Cornwell. And so it makes sense. It follows the books in some regards and doesn't follow the books in other regards. I think what's good about the books is that at the end of each book, and that's true for the Saxon series, which is the one with what the Last Kingdom is, and also the Sharp series, which is another series of books set during the Napoleonic Wars and a little bit earlier, that he always puts at the back sort of, this is what I changed from what we know to be historical fact. So at the end of one of the Last Kingdom books, he says, I've made Æthelred a villain because it makes for interesting reading, but actually there is no evidence that he was some kind of conniving rapist or whatever. He was probably quite a nice guy. He was probably just doing what he could to survive. And actually what from what we understand, he probably had quite a loving relationship with Æthelfled. They worked well together. Because at the same time, I think Æthelfled's status of being the lady of the Mercians is probably in some part thanks to Æthelred as well, that he was happy to rule together with her and to work together to make the Buiri and to launch these offensives. And especially when his health was getting worse after he'd suffered this injury or this illness, it's debated which it was that she then took over.
Yeah, no, but and also that's why it just was really annoying watching that the plot with Edward saying, no, I don't want Æthelflad in Mercia and to rule Mercia, because actually it was the opposite, because Æthelred paved the way for then Æthelflad to then take the throne and take charge, and I don't think that Edward could have really done anything about it. And like I said earlier, he wanted her to be ruling in Mercia. And also that relationship that shows that Æthelred and Æthelflad got on well is shown by the fact that there's not really any opposition that Æthelflad is greeted with when she takes command of Mercia, as it were, unlike Æthelwold with Edward. And then also this is then strengthened by the fact that Aelfwynn, her daughter, takes the throne in 918 when Æthelflad dies, and it's the only time in British history when a mother is succeeded by her daughter, which is phenomenal.
It's interesting. The case of Aelfwynn is interesting because I suppose it's also important to highlight that she didn't really take the throne in a way, because as we've said, Æthelfled is seen as Lady of the Mercians. I'm just anticipating the comments. Okay, I'm just going to jump in front of it. So stop typing. I know who you are. I can see you. Get it over from the keyboard.
she is the lady. She's not a queen, and that's what annoyed me when Æthelflad had a line where she's like, "Now that I'm queen of the Mercians." No, you were just the lady. But yeah, no. I mean, taking the throne to mean ruling Mercia in the sense of being the leading it politically and also militarily.
Of course. Yeah, but it's interesting that she does take over in a way, and it seems like the Mercians are happy with that as the transition, that the ealdormen or whoever have sort of agreed to this, that they're happy to go on that way and be more sort of semi-autonomous from Wessex. The relationship with Wessex is interesting, but then obviously Edward goes hippity hoppity, Mercia my property, yeets in, takes her, cloisters her, puts her in a nunnery. Yeah, sounds like I'm doing some kind of weird rap, but yeah.
or even worse, she could have been put into nunnery, or she could have been eliminated. She could have also. We have to stop because the phone is ringing. I don't know if you can hear the phone in the background, but we're waiting until the phone stops ringing. There we go. Sorry. Aelfwynn could have been murdered by him. Edward was a competent leader and he knew what needed to be done, and I think he was ruthless when it counts. So we really don't know what Aelfwynn's fate was, whether that was in a nunnery or even worse. And I think that Edward would have been alert to the fact that Aelfwynn could have been taken to be a figurehead by a dissident group that wanted to take Mercia back, make Mercia great again, which is what we see in the Last Kingdom, that it's kind of as if they want to split off from Wessex, when actually that doesn't really benefit Mercia doing that.
That's a really good point, because I think it's also important to put what's happening in the Last Kingdom into context, because obviously for Anglo-Saxon history up until that point, Mercia and Wessex had been completely independent kingdoms from one another. They'd often fought against each other. You've got the Mercian supremacy that occurs in the 8th century, the earlier 8th century, or rather the later 8th century. And then you kind of get this balance of power towards the start of the 9th century with King Egbert of Wessex. He sort of, does a number on the Mercians in a number of ways. And Wessex is the foremost kingdom when the Danes arrive. But they had been working together already before this point, but really they were different kingdoms. Mercia had different kings, although there were clearly connections, because remember that the last real queen of Mercia was Æthelflaed's aunt at the end of the day. So the do I say that in a very northern way? Aunt. Is it? How do you say that in the south?
Aunt.
There we go. So it's not an insect. It's not an insect, but it's Alfred's sister. So her dad's sister.
Yeah.
But yeah, her dad's sister. So
Æthelflad.
Æthelflad. That's the one. I was waiting for you to fill me in there, because they really don't pick different names, do they? There's a lot of Ethels.
They do. There's too many. Yeah. But don't you think it's interesting that Edward as a name still survives today, but Æthelflad just seems completely alien to us? And Alfred is still a name that we would have today, but Ælfswith, we wouldn't get many baby girls called Ælfswith. Which, anyway,
well,
little
who
thought.
knows? With the changing fortunes of people watching The Last Kingdom, we're probably going to have a lot of baby Uhtred's. You're just going to,
baby
be walking through.
That would be amazing.
You'll be walking through the shops, and you'll just hear, no, that's Uhtred with a UH in Starbucks or whatever. Someone just struggling to read out the name. They're like, Æthelflad. And it's like, that's mine. My parents were idiots and they watched The Last Kingdom. But who knows?
I mean, some of the names, they are quite beautiful. I mean, Æthelflad means noble beauty, which is a lovely name, and we get names like Alfgifu, which is elf gift, and Athelstan, noble stone, which are names that have a lot of meaning. So yeah, why not bring them back?
I mean, I think, isn't it the case that there's hardly anyone called Edward before Edward the Elder, and then it becomes the name of, I think there's 2 kings after him that are called Edward in the Anglo-Saxon period. Is it 2 or 2, I think, that it becomes a more popular name after that point.
Yeah, interesting.
I'm not sure if you've heard about that as well.
Yeah, but then that also brings up the point about, well, okay, if Alfred was seen as a great king, and he's celebrated by us today, but was that the case back in Anglo-Saxon England? Because actually you don't see any other kings after that being called Alfred, and normally I think the tradition is, if you're a celebrated king and people know who you are, then they kind of rename a child after a previous king. but that just doesn't really happen with Alfred, which is interesting. But then again, maybe that wasn't a practice, and that's only introduced after the Norman conquest.
Potentially, I
Which is
think
interesting.
what happens more, from my understanding, in the Anglo-Saxon period is that you had certain kings, and you'd have the kind of the prefix of the name of the compound name. So the first element would be sort of dynastic in a way. So if you look at Mercian genealogies in kings lists from the 9th century and the 8th century, then you can kind of track which family is in control at that point, because they all start with the same elements. So, like, for example, King Kenwulf or
Oh yes,
Kenred and
yeah,
things like this. And I think
yeah.
you
You
can
get the
see that
C
happening.
dynasty, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the C dynasty and
The C and the
you get the
B,
W
yeah,
ones, I think, as well. But
exactly,
and
yeah.
I think you can see something similar happening in the names of the kings from Alfred's line, because I think Alfred, as I said, Edward, the kind of the Ed part, which means wealth, you don't really get that before so much, but you get Edward, and then you get the sons of Edward that come after Athelstan, whereas you had the Ethel was very much a kind of the I mean, it was common throughout, but it's clearly a feature that's found throughout the names of the West Saxon kings. So you also have, of course, Æthelwulf, which is Alfred's dad. Then he
Mm.
had sons Ethelbert. He had another son,
Yeah,
Ethelstan, and then obviously you
Athel,
get Ethelstan,
Athelred,
the
and
son of
yeah,
Edward. But then you also get other sons of Edward. You get Eadred, Eadwy, and Edmund. So all using the Ead. And then as well, after them, you get Edgar. And then after that, you also have Ethelred. So it goes back. And then later on, you have Edward the Confessor. So you can see it's Ed and Ethel all the way, really.
Yeah. I wonder if that got confusing to the
I'm sure it
Saxons.
would, because you have so many women that are called Alfjevu.
Yeah.
Once you get up until, so a little inside here for the non-ASNC familiars, is that the way that the course is structured for Anglo-Saxon history is that over 2 years you do the entire course. So you do half of the course in 1 year and the next half. And so the cycle that we're in now, this last year, we did earlier Anglo-Saxon history, so up until the end of Alfred's reign. Whereas next year, so the year that Grace hasn't done yet, being the sprightly newbie that she is the later Anglo-Saxon period. So you'll learn all about that stuff next year.
Yeah,
And I can't
fantastic.
remember what my original point was, but I've just explained how the
Very good.
Anglo-Saxon system works. It was a fun one.
that was a good tangent.
It was.
But also, I think interestingly that the names of the rulers and of the kings and the queens, they sound very regal. They do sound
Mm.
royal. And then so it would be interesting to look at, okay, what were the normal commoners called in Anglo-Saxon England, because you don't really have a record of that. The same as
That's
in
very true.
the later medieval period. You got the kingly names like Edward, Henry, Richard. But actually, what would the commoners have been called? Was there a difference? Like we see the names of Uhtred's gang, like Finan and Sigtrid, and that they sound different in their quality, the alval quality. Whereas names like Athelstan, Æthelflad, Edward, they sound very regal and noble.
Mm. That might be a slightly retrospective way of looking at it, because obviously we've had 8 kings. Is it 8 or 9 kings called Edward in the meantime? So it's clearly been an important name for kings. And I guess with Finan is from Irish, and then Sigtrich is an Old Norse name. What was the other guy called? Halig, I think, was the name of the Anglo-Saxon dude in his gang for a while. And you also had Leofrich.
Oh,
So those are
Leofrich, yeah.
names that survive. In terms of the names that, I suppose there's a few ways. There's one is you get name stones. They're mostly in ecclesiastical contexts, so you find them in Northumbria a lot of the time. At Hartlepool, there was a foundation there, and also in Lindisfarne. So quick plug to the archaeological dig I was a part of. We found some name stones with runes on them. So that is one way that you can find sort of more ordinary names for Anglo-Saxon people. Whereas with in a Scandinavian context, you can use rune stones to look at what the more ordinary names of people out in the countryside was, but they come in a little bit later than the period of the Last Kingdom. Sort of, you get a big boom in runestone construction, especially in Sweden, the end of the 10th century and the 11th century. So I guess that's one way we could find that out. But it is interesting, would ordinary people outside of the ranks of the the ealdormen and royal houses, would they be calling the children Ethel as well? Because obviously they wouldn't be noble. So would those be kind of names that were reserved in that way, or yeah?
Yeah.
I guess it's like calling your child Petunia or something. Like you just wouldn't unless you were from a good status, I suppose.
I love how Petunia is your go-to posh name.
Of course, Petunia. Well, I mean, I wasn't allowed to say Grace, so I mean, I had to choose something else. But I don't think Grace is a particularly posh name. Like I've met poor people called Grace before.
No, it's not. It's a universal name. I think it's great.
I think so.
I think it's not a medieval name. I think it comes from the Puritans when they name their children after qualities of Christianity, like patience, faith, grace. I think that there was a really funny horrible history sketch where they kind of list all of the names of real life people from that era, and they're called like fight the good fight of faith and stuff like wisdom and divine providence, like actual names like that. Anyway, this is a massive tangent, not really about
While we're on this tangent though, what would my sort of Puritan name after equality be?
Oh no, now you're putting me on the spot. After equality,
insolence.
Maybe. Yeah. I was like, shall I be nice or shall I be mean?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Impertinence. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
Impertinence vinkenug.
It doesn't quite roll off the tongue that well, I mean,
no.
Yeah, impertinence Hogglesworth. That'll be my posh name.
Hogglesworth. What would your Saxon name be if you?
Hilbert.
Hilbert. Yeah, I don't know why I asked that question. So yeah.
It's an easy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really want them. Okay, so let's hope that this podcast really gets noticed by the producers. I want there to be, and this might just be my vanity talking, but I want there to be a Frisian character in the show. Get some exposure for the Frisians.
Hilbert.
Because there are in the books, right? In the books, there are Frisians, and we know there were Frisians fighting in Alfred's navy. We know they were around. They probably took part in the Great Heathen Army as well. So there might be some kicking around among the Danes. I'm waiting for the Frisian cameo.
Interesting.
If you need a real Frisian to come and play, someone who knows about history, not too bad looking, I'm here. All I'm saying is, just get in touch. Email address is in the description.
Oh, that is such a good try. Well done. I think they have to let you in there. But yeah, that's interesting. It's going back to what makes entertainment, because you were saying in the books there's Frisians. So then,
yes,
why would there? Who took that decision to think, actually, we're going to exclude the Frisians and not put the Frisians in the show? Because there is a difference between, like you said earlier, Bernard Cornwell said, okay, I'm going to make Æthelflaed a bad character just to give it some interest. But there's a difference between changing people's personalities and actually changing history, adding stuff in or excluding stuff. That's why it was very frustrating to see the siege of Winchester, and also to see that the plot line that Uhtred was going to be Lord of Mercia, because that just didn't happen. And so there is a difference between changing, like genuinely changing history, and just changing the characters. Because I think if The Last Kingdom was accurate, apart from maybe the presentation of Edward, which I know really annoys you, Hilbert, that wouldn't be as big a deal. Whereas it's the fact that that's coupled with all these new events that didn't happen.
Yeah, I think maybe in the case of the Frisians, it's the fact that they play a role. So there's some Frisians in his squad, but they're not an essential role. Like if you got rid of Alfred, like The Last Kingdom just wouldn't work. Whereas if you get rid of the Frisians, it's kind of fine because they're kind of side characters anyway. But no, I'm just ready for the Frisian cameo. I think it would be great.
Maybe it's to do with budget. They couldn't afford. Maybe Hilbert, you're just too big a star. They can't afford to pay you to be an actor in the show. That's
this is terrible. Well, you know what? I'm willing to do it for free. Okay, as long as I don't have to carry a rectangular shield, I am willing to do this for free. I'll only carry a round shield. I'll bring my own. I have one. I'm just ready.
I knew you were going to talk about the rectangular shields. I knew that
But
was going to happen.
it's just one of the worst things. It's like they're pseudo Romans, but the fact is they don't actually paint the shields at all. They don't put any cloth over it. You know, you can, because the problem is if you have untreated wood on a shield, you can see exactly where the planks are that put it together, and you can literally see the planks on the shields. And it's like, if you're someone who is attacking this person with that shield, you just have to strike where the planks meet, and you've broken the shield, and it's useless. And uh, it
Yeah.
doesn't make much sense. You can
It
kind of see what I mean, though. It's like
yeah.
they were intelligent, and obviously, if you're going to go into battle, you're going to do absolutely everything you can to not get killed in a stupid way. You know, it's just kind of it makes sense, and so it's a little bit silly to see that a lot of the time. And people charging into battle without a shield is a big no. Like
Yeah.
that's what's keeping you safe. You know, come on,
And
work
and also
work together, make a shield wall.
make a
Come
shield.
on, it's not
And
that
also
hard.
the armour, or rather lack of armour, that both
Mm.
Æthelflad and Edward wear, that they are the leaders of Mercia and Wessex, but they've probably got the least amount of protection on them.
The amount of leather in the show, it's like whenever they introduce a new set of Vikings, I'm like, okay, which Norwegian rock band has joined the show this time? The ones in Wales were particularly bad. Because he had eyeliner on, he had the long hair, he was just wearing black leather, and I was like, hold on a minute, he just come from some metal concert? Like, what? Like, honestly, that and the dreadlocks, I don't know what. Who made the costumes for the, like, no
However, this is
disrespect, but
clearly
like
no,
maybe a
but
little bit of disrespect,
no,
but
but
no.
clearly the costume designer is a very talented costume designer, and I think that the costumes are good. They're just not historically accurate, and but in my opinion, I think in both our opinions, they don't suit that well. The vibe of the show and the aesthetic that the producers and the writers have gone for is to make it very edgy, which
Mm,
again is that entertainment side of it. You know, you have the Vikings being edgy, blah blah, blah. But actually it just wasn't like that. Which, and then you think, okay, does that actually does that distract from the history, or does that make people sit down and think, hang on, I wonder what it was actually like, and investigate those things further? I mean, probably not, but if we're trying to
mm.
put a positive spin on it, maybe.
I think it kind of more perpetuates the stereotypes of the Danes or the Vikings just being these, huge men wearing fur that just kill
Yeah.
everything in sight rather than
which is
actually,
which is
you know.
annoying, because actually, like we were saying earlier, they weren't. A lot of them were farmers, and this is, yeah. It just also makes our roles as students of ASNC a lot harder, because when I say to people, oh yeah, I study ASNC, first of all they say, oh, that's really cool, there's hardly anyone that does that, and then they say, oh, isn't that just, like Vikings and Beowulf? And I'm like, no, it's not, it's so much more than that, which is frustrating.
It is quite frustrating, and I think it's really good that we've had shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom, because certainly when I was in the Netherlands, it's certainly had an impact on people being interested in the period, and there's a lot more interest now, which is really great. But I think that also wields a certain responsibility. So something I thought I was thinking about the other day was that if you're portraying a different culture and you portrayed it as incorrectly as they've portrayed a lot of the history in The Last Kingdom, it wouldn't really fly today. So say if you made a program, set in among a tribe in Papua New Guinea, and you showed them all, I don't know, wearing Vietnamese hats, it wouldn't really be correct. So, and you'd kind of see it and you'd think, oh, that's a bit awkward. And it's kind of the same way with the history. Of course, it's different because they're not alive today, but it is, they are real people, and it does impact in a huge way how people view history. The amount of interest in shield maidens and fighting women since Vikings portrayed it is skyrocketed. There really wasn't that much interest in it beforehand, and now suddenly a lot of archaeology is going, oh, look at this, which is interesting, and they might have a strong argument, but I think it certainly plays a role. And so I think if you're playing such a huge role, you also have a responsibility in
Yeah,
in a certain way to to in it well yeah.
definitely. And that's why the plot with Æthelflad being Uhtred's love interest just annoyed me, because I felt it really undermined her independence and her power as a really strong female lead character, but also in real life as this military leader and also a politician. That I just couldn't help but thinking, what would the actual Æthelflad be thinking if she watched this? Because as well, she was a deeply pious and Christian woman as
Hold on,
well.
it was the sex scene that annoyed you, right? Let's
No,
get right
not
down
just
to it.
that. No, not just that. No.
Okay, anyway, you were saying she was a strongly pious woman.
Yeah, she was. But no, we don't worry. No, but anyway, and it is interesting because we don't have records of her relationships, and yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with this now, Hilbert.
Sorry, I completely threw you there, but I thought I'd throw that into the mix because it's something we talked about earlier. And I mean,
Yeah,
you are
did,
right in a way, because these are historical people, you know, and what we show of them in these shows is how most people will think of them. So I think there is a certain responsibility to show them in a, you know, maybe in a respectful light, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I was going with. Yeah. That. Yeah, I think that if the real Æthelflad was watching this and she thought, hang on, why is there a sex scene with supposedly her there? I think that that would annoy her.
At the same time, she might think, damn, I was hot, you know?
Damn, yeah.
Maybe she would, who knows, right? We don't really know. Maybe they were all repressed, and, you know, women wearing wimples and all of this kind of thing and not showing any ankles, but behind, you know, the halls closed doors, who knows, right?
To be fair, I mean, humans are humans. We never change.
I mean, that's very true. Yeah. The more changes, the more stays the same.
Yeah. Ooh, deep.
That's me.
Can I steer the conversation back towards Æthelflad for a minute? Because there is actually there's actually something that I do want to talk about, and this is possibly more to do with Æthelflad as a real life character rather than in the Last Kingdom. But what makes Æthelflad remarkable is the fact that she is kind of taking on this masculine role as this leader of men, and she has the power and respect of a lord would have with her thane. So, for example, in Derby in 917, when there's a battle there against the Vikings and the Mercians end up taking Derby, her chronicle records that I think 4 of her thanes that are the most close to her and the most loyal to her are killed. And it's remarkable that the chronicle comments on this, because this close relationship that you see between lord and thane and the loyalty, you know thanes were expected to be loyal and lay down their life for their lord, and in this case they're doing it for their lady. And it's a relationship that is celebrated in literature, for example in the Battle of Maldon. And so that it's amazing that Æthelflad is being portrayed in that light, which again I feel that they could do in the Last Kingdom, because I felt like to a certain extent that she couldn't quite shake off being seen as Alfred's daughter, which is a massive part of her identity, but she needs to come into her own more and be recognised as a woman by herself, and not just as kind of left over from being in the court in Wessex. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's a good point. Do you think, having said that kind of jogged something in my mind, which is the portrayal of Elizabeth, because she is another, you know, incredibly interesting woman, incredibly powerful woman from British history. And so oftentimes she's portrayed as kind of the way that she functioned in the court was she was surrounded by very ambitious, plotting men in her court. And the way that she kind of kept them under control was that, you know, she remained celibate the entire time. And obviously this isn't the case with Æthelflad, because she has a daughter. So she clearly at some point did do the devil's tango with Ethelred, and that's fine. You know, they're married. That's okay.
Where did that come from? I've never heard that before. Is that a northern way of saying it?
The devil? No, it's definitely not. The devil's tango. I think. Oh, I don't know. I think there might be a YouTube channel that uses that term sometimes. Which one is it? I don't know. Comment below if you know which channel it is. But yeah, it's a great term. It's a great term. But devil's tango aside, do you think there might have been?
Sorry, can I just say it's what Dr. Dance, he says they're playing Cluedo together, or they're playing Scrabble. That's the way that he says it. Sorry, carry on. I needed to shout out to Dr. Dance.
Anything that Dr. Dance, he's our lecturer, Old English. Anything that he says, you know, deserves to be repeated here. Absolutely.
Yeah. Get him on your podcast.
Well, that is the plan. That is completely the plan. It's the fact that
Great.
whenever it was, the four lectures on Beowulf, and each one had a caption. So sort of the first one, Beowulf Origins. The second one, Beowulf 2. This time it's personal. It's just it's the small details that make the lecturer.
Yeah, exactly. And his little toy bear wolf, and he brought props with him and everything. Oh, it's great. Absolutely
It's
great.
the comics of Beowulf Vampire Slayer.
Yes,
If
the
you need
Beowulf
a pick
comic.
me up,
Oh,
those
fantastic.
are
That
absolutely
was a
incredible.
weird. I wasn't expecting to be seeing that at 5 p.m. on a Friday evening when
Oh,
when our lectures
me
finished.
neither. Beowulf just fighting some UFO, saving some busty woman from Martians and vampires. It's interesting.
Thing is, okay, right, controversial opinion. I'm not a fan of Beowulf. I don't see what the fuss is about. I think there's far more beautiful poems such as Judith or The Dream of the Rood, which deserve to have attention. And I just think the Beowulf is just why I don't. The story doesn't appeal to me, and I understand that
I'm
warrior
sorry, we
culture
are
is a bit.
experiencing technical difficulties on the podcast, and we have to shut it down.
I know,
Okay,
controversial
this is
opinion,
very
but
controversial. Okay, tell me
yeah,
why don't you like Beowulf? What's wrong with Beowulf?
I just okay. It's not
Break it
that
down.
I don't find personally. I don't like Old English poetry that is kind of warrior focused. I prefer the more kind of beautiful and reflective ones, such as The Dream of the Rood and also Judith, which is just phenomenal because again that's a piece that's completely dedicated to a strong female character. And it's not that I don't like Beowulf. I mean, I do. Yeah, no, actually, I don't really like it, but I understand why people write about it, but it's just that I don't think it deserves to have a whole part 2 course dedicated to it. Sorry to at you, Dr. Dance, but I think that you should update your course.
Oh
So,
no!
no.
Wow. But it is
No, but I think I just.
the longest piece of Old English poetry,
But also, it's the fact that there was a
and the
phase
fact that
where
it's all
people said,
rhyming and in meter.
yeah, but so were other Old English poems.
Yeah,
I mean,
but they're nowhere near as long as Beowulf, and it's that fact alone makes it incredible. Like the ratio of non-Beowulf Old English poetry to Beowulf is huge. So like Beowulf makes up a really big part of our Old English corpus just by being Beowulf on its own.
but it's only in one manuscript.
Yeah, which makes it incredible that so much of the language has been preserved in one poem, which is all written in the meter and in really nice poetry, in my opinion. Maybe not in yours.
Okay, well, I shall maybe re-examine what I think, but I think that equally other poems should be given a chance in the spotlight, and they are equally as beautiful and well written. So that is
I mean, I
my.
agree with you there because Beowulf is it's by far the most famous, and I think it does deserve its reputation. But I do agree that it would be nice for other Old English poems to get some more coverage. Like, for example, the Battle of Maldon, the Dream of the Rood. I think those are, up there. Those are really nice as
And
well.
they are also. I think the reason why I like those poems is because they are very intelligent and really shows the learned writers and the poets. Whereas there's a tendency to think, oh, with Beowulf, it was all just fighting. But actually, in a way, that's also not true because the poet who wrote it is clearly a skilled poet. I just feel that it perpetuates the idea that Anglo-Saxon society was a fighting society and warriors, but when actually as well that there is that side of it where it's incredibly intelligent and skilled in poetry, but also in craftsmanship and they were very good at farming. So I just don't feel it's an accurate representation of Anglo-Saxon society. I don't think you can just read Beowulf and think, oh, I've studied Anglo-Saxon literature, because there is so much more out there.
I mean, that's true, but I don't think you could say that for any kind of literature that you read one poem and you say, aha, now I've understood all of the literature. But on the one hand, is how much is the role of one text to embody a society? It's very difficult to do that. But
the problem is
does
with
the Dream of the Rood do that better? Because the Dream of the Rood is about a cross in Jerusalem. So what does that tell us about Anglo-Saxon culture? If anything, it tells us less, I think.
yeah.
Or Judith, she's not an Anglo-Saxon woman.
Yeah, but I think that, but with Beowulf, because it is by far the most known out of all the other poems, there is a tendency for people who maybe aren't as knowledgeable about the Anglo-Saxon world or literature to think, oh yeah, I've just read Beowulf and finish it at that. But yeah, no, I do agree. I think that the Dream of the Rood, that just shows the ecclesiastical part and the religion which was central to Anglo-Saxon society, in a way that Beowulf doesn't. So yeah, I will
It's an
develop
interesting take.
my argument and get back to you on that one. I just
No
thought I'd throw it
problem.
into the mix just to unsettle you.
Just to unsettle me. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it did work a little bit. It was quite shocking to hear someone say that they're not a fan of Beowulf, especially to diss disco in that way.
No. I
Awful.
love disco. I think I made that clear. I just don't. It would
Disco
be
is
nice
Dr.
to
Dance,
see.
by the way, for
Yeah,
anyone.
I told you that.
Yeah.
It would just be nice to see a part two course that is not just on Beowulf, because I just think it's a shame to not give more attention to the other poems. Maybe if I end up doing the part two Beowulf course, I'll be converted, and then I'll have
Who
to come on the
knows?
podcast again and fill everyone
And
in.
renounce your heresy.
but honestly, I think. But the great thing about having Dr. Dance is that he makes anything interesting. We are so lucky in the ASNC department to have amazing lecturers. That disco is just hilarious, and yeah, he really brings the texts alive. So yeah, massive shout out to the ASNC department, because yeah, like Cambridge is just fantastic, and like having a really dedicated department like ASNC on top of that is just brilliant. So yeah.
It is really good. What did you sort of feel when you first came to Cambridge? Was it very different from, I'm guessing it was very different from where you grew up. I mean, it certainly was for me. And did you find it quite easy to kind of settle into the way of life? Because it is really quite different. Or did you find it
Yeah.
quite difficult?
No, I found it quite easy because I'd visited Cambridge a lot before, whilst I was applying and that kind of thing. So I knew my way around the city. But I come from a small village in the countryside, so it was actually really nice to be in Cambridge, where so many people from around the world come to. And yeah, I think that one of the best things about Cambridge is the college system, and I really felt that I had friends in, like college sisters or college brothers and college parents, that scheme, that I really knew who I could go to if I was in trouble, and people would help me around the city or that kind of thing. So yeah, it wasn't as scary as moving to university might at first seem, because genuinely everyone is so friendly. I might be different at other colleges, but in my college, everyone was really happy to help and was so friendly, and that's what I was quite. That's the thing that took me aback at first, because they were just genuinely invested in helping you, were interested and also excited for you to be at university, which I wasn't expecting. They were thinking, oh yeah, like they were saying, you're going to have a great time and make sure to do this and get involved in drama, blah blah blah, which I hadn't really prepared myself for, that everyone actually encourages other people, which is just such a breath of fresh air.
It is a really nice thing about Cambridge. It did surprise me as well, as that everyone just kind of gets on, and your background isn't that important at all. I've never felt that people have sort of looked down on me from coming from the north
Coming
and from
from
a
the
poor
north.
area or anything. The north,
The
the
north,
king of
yeah.
the north. Yeah, but yeah, no, it has been really nice. But also, just for the listeners, which college are you at, and how
I'm
have
at
you found your
Christ.
college?
I'm at Christ's College, which it gets a bad reputation. Well, I think it's a great college,
A
but
nerdy
in
reputation.
in Cambridge, it has the reputation of being at the top of the Tompkins table, which the Tompkins table is it ranks the colleges based on how many students in that college, the proportion of students who get a first at the end of their degree. And Christ's has topped the Tompkins table for a couple of years running, I think now. So we just get the reputation that we're a very hardworking and nerdy college. But actually, Christ, it's the perfect place for me. Everyone is so friendly. It's quite drama-y as well. There's a lot of fests there, and it's a nice medium-sized college. I just love it so much. It feels like a real community, that people in different years come together. Yeah, it's great. And also a mixture of backgrounds. We're quite a gap year heavy college and quite an international college. So I've got friends from all over the world, which is amazing. It's really enriched my experience of Cambridge. And also central location. We are literally right in the centre. So you can pop out to Tesco or Sainsbury's and you don't have to trek all the way from Cats, Hilbert.
Well, St. Catherine's, the central site is quite nice, but in the second year living at St.
Yeah.
Cad's, which you can see in my little plug here in my vlog from Cambridge, Vlogs and Clogs, the Cambridge experience. You can see it there where I was living. But
then it
okay,
is
so
close
you've
to the
mentioned.
Sidge, so that's good.
Say again?
It's close to the Sidgwick site, which is good
That's
for you.
true.
Whereas
I could literally get to lectures in about 2 minutes, which is nice. From rolling out of bed to walking down the stairs and into a lecture. Yeah,
But
not
then
that happened a lot.
But then I love being right in the city because it's close to loads of different places, and also I get to walk through King's College every day to go to my lectures, which is a real kind of pinch me moment. It's crazy being in Cambridge because some days you'll just be so caught up in your work and really stressed about deadlines and think, oh, I've just got to go to my lecture and just head down and power walk. And then other days it will be gorgeous and sunny and you think, oh my gosh, I'm in Cambridge, there's Kings, oh my goodness me, and just really feel the history around you and just the privilege of being in Cambridge because it's a fantastic place to be. There's so much that goes on there and it's really amazing.
It really is. It's absolutely spectacular. And I think you're absolutely right that some days you don't appreciate it as much just because there's so much going on. But when you do stop and think, you think, oh my God, it's so beautiful. It's just an amazing city. And the atmosphere there is incredible as well. It's it's making me sad that we missed the last term now. And, when we go back, things will be different with sort of social distancing and all that kind of thing. But it's just a wonderful place. So if you're someone who's watching and who's applying for universities and thinks, Cambridge, I'll never get in, just try it. If you don't shoot, you don't score.
Definitely,
or as we say in the North, shy Ben's getting out. So just give it a go. And Ben, by the way, might be something that survived in northern dialects because of the
I was going to say that. Yeah.
There is also, I think it's Beorn in Old English for child as well, so it's possibly from both. But you have Barn in Norwegian still from Old Norse. I'm not sure what the Old Norse word is. I think it might just be Barn or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also, Knecht is a young man that survives into knight. The kind of Middle English word for
in
knight.
Dutch, Knecht is from the same root, but it means servant.
Interesting. Well, it's like Charl, which Charl is that meaning has changed.
It has, but it's also the root for Charles. That's where that name comes from. Yeah, it is because English palatalizes. Yeah, exactly. Because English palatalizes, the Anglo-Frisian language palatalizes, whereas in Dutch you still have the original k. So you have Karel is the name for Charles in Dutch, but you also have Kerel, so slight change in the vowel, which means like dude, man in Dutch. So you still have that. Whereas English churlish isn't a good thing.
Yeah.
It pretty much means dude. Like Kerel is like a man, a dude, that kind of thing in Dutch. Yeah.
But then it's interesting as well that the woman, the word for woman is wif, is wife. It's the same word. There's not a distinction between wife and woman.
You still have that in Northumbrian. You can call someone a wife. It's not particularly polite, and actually you can do that in Dutch as well. If you call someone vijf, it's like it doesn't actually mean as in wife in English, because that's our word for that is vrouw, which is also the word for woman. So we haven't lost that distinction. But vijf is like a rude term for a woman, and you can call someone a wife in Northumbrian. You can say, "Oh, that wife's proper clarty, man."
Oh wow!
Which isn't very polite, but you can do it. No. It's interesting how it survives.
Yeah. Wow, we've seamlessly talked about so many things in this podcast.
Exactly. I mean, I feel like that's the idea, right? You just slide from one topic into the next as long as it flows.
Definitely. Yeah. I think what would be interesting, what I do like about The Last Kingdom is that it's very international, and so you have lots of different accents there. And you have actors from Scandinavia, from Germany, from the UK, which kind of gives a sense of like realism or naturalism to it, that they're not just putting on accents, that they actually do have European actors to play the Vikings, or the Scandinavian actors to play the Vikings. So you get that the richness of the sounds, which is really nice to listen to, because you have a contrast from Edward speaking and being English to Uhtred, who is more you get the fusion between the Saxon and Dane, even though, as you said earlier, he's not.
It is interesting though, because all the like Alfred and Edward, they speak really RP English, and that is the RP accent has been incredibly influenced by vowel shifts and by Norman French influence in the south, so that occurred after the Anglo-Saxon period. So really, potentially, if we're going to go with a modern accent, potentially something like the Black Country, that's how they should be
Yeah.
talking. Apparently, that's the closest, right, to Old English. So it's interesting that that is what we would perceive to be royal and regal, but in the Anglo-Saxon period, obviously, it would be a different language, Old English. But if we're going to go with an accent, that probably shouldn't be the accent we go with. And I think they
Yeah.
created their own accents, right? So for the Scandinavians, they kind of create a Scandinavian accent. So one of my favorite characters to hear speak was Ubba in the first season, who was called Ubba Dux Frisonum, so the Duke of the Frisians. Fun fact, gotta plug them in when you can. But his accent was great. I really like. He's a Scandinavian actor. I think he's Danish, the actor. That he's a great actor as well. And his accent, but Uhtred's accent is like a mix between the two that they invented just for him.
Yeah, I really like Uhtred's accent. And then when I heard him speak in his normal voice, which has kind of got this American accent, I thought, oh my
Yeah,
goodness, is this the same guy? Yeah,
because
it's very
he's
true.
German, right? Alexander Dreymon, I think
Yeah, I
he's
think
like
yeah,
German American or something like that.
yeah. Which it's so interesting. I was listening to a podcast that he did, and he was saying that he's been doing Uhtred for so long that he can so easily switch on and off to Uhtred. He can just easily go into Uhtred's way of thinking and speaking, and then easily switch that off and go back to himself. It's almost like it's become a part of him, where he doesn't
That's
need
pretty
to
cool.
do preparation for like 30 minutes in the morning to get the accent right. He can just
Mm.
turn it on as like in the blink of an eye, which is amazing. And he is a brilliant actor. I think he is one of the reasons why this show has been so successful, because I
I
think
think
I can
definitely.
imagine anyone else being Uhtred.
That's very true. I mean, me and James were talking, and James has appeared on the channel a few times and in the vlogs. By the way, the fellow ASNC James, we were talking. We were thinking if anyone could replace Uhtred, it would be Sean Bean.
Sharp, who played Sharp, which is
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah,
and
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. No, but can you imagine
yeah,
Sean
that's
Bean
interesting.
like, I'm Uhtred, son of Uhtred. He's like, get the bloody
I,
fist up, I'll beat the ruddy.
I think that would be
Be
a very
great, a
different
Yorkshire Uhtred.
vibe.
I mean, he's
Also,
Northumbrian, right? Yorkshire was in Northumbria at the time. It
yeah,
works,
there we
you know.
go. I think I really I thought it was really clever the way that they portrayed Alfred, that he actually was quite weak physically, and was
Mm,
the focus was more on his like intellectual side and the cunning behind the
right.
politician, because you see these Victorian statues about Alfred being the warrior, and the
Mm.
focus on him being warrior and like played by like a big actor with a beard and everything and quite old, whereas actually um the Last Kingdom was probably closer to what Alfred was actually like, because he was plagued by a lot of illness, and
Right,
he was
it
a
might have
clever
been
politician.
Crohn's disease, right?
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
they think. It might have been Crohn's or something like that. Yeah.
yeah. Which I just thought was a really nice breath of fresh air and a really nice interpretation, because I was not expecting that at all. And then the more that I watched it, I thought actually I really like this interpretation.
Mm. I think it's good they showed the intellectual side, because obviously that's part of what makes Alfred great, is that you had this whole literary renaissance that occurred, because during the 9th century, the standard of the written language that was occurring, most of it was in Latin before that point, and the standard really decreased, and that's normally laid at the feet of the Vikings, that they came in with the great heathen army and they burned a load of monasteries, and monks were like, can't be writing manuscripts when there's Danes pillaging
Yeah,
everything.
we've forgotten
But
how to
even
write.
before that, yeah, well, yeah, and it's like,
They just
even before that, the standards of the script just declines. There's less writing going on, but Alfred says, come on, we really need to do something about this, and that's when you start to see a lot more writing occurring in Old English. That they think, actually, let's write things in the vernacular language, because before that, it was written mostly in Latin at the time, even though they were speaking
yeah.
Old English.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the Vikings even destroyed a whole script system, and the English, the vernacular that was being written, was written in this new Saxon square minuscule as well. So it really had a unique
Yeah,
flavour to it. Yeah, and
it
I
is interesting. Yeah, you do get this new script that emerges, and probably with continental influences, because of, I mean, again, you mentioned the
oh, the
international
Carolingian.
dynamic. Right, yeah, exactly. So they take elements from continental script styles. So you have John the Old Saxon that comes in, and it mentions that Frisians came to his court, and other people from across sort of continental Europe came to his court, and you can see the influence in the writing. And yet,
And also from Mercia, I
I
think.
think Debbie Banham calls it Alfredian minuscule. Mm.
Oh yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
and
No,
this is
go ahead.
I was going to say that this is the legacy of Mercia and Wessex cooperating and working together. That again is really frustrating. That Edward's like, no, Æthelflad can't rule Mercia because it was just the natural progression of things, and because this legacy of cooperation between the two kingdoms starts in the 9th century with as we said earlier, Aethelflaed marrying King, is it Burgred of Mercia?
Yeah, it's King Burgred. Mm.
Yes, Burgred.
Wait, did you want to say anything else? Like,
No,
please
no,
don't let me interrupt you.
no, the continuation. But
Okay,
yeah,
well, in that
there we
case,
go.
I will continue. And you also have the joint coinage system, so you have the lunette system of coins that are being minted in both Mercia and in Wessex, but granted
Yeah,
with the different kings on them, which is interesting because the Mercian one was a lot more debased, but the West Saxon one had more higher silver content, but it's the Mercian one that was accepted, which kind of I can't remember what the law is. Is it Godson's law or something? Can you remember? Rory talked about it at some point.
no, I don't know if I've done that. Was that in part? Was that in your first year? Or actually, if Rory was
No,
talking
no,
about.
because Rory wasn't here last year, so it was this year. I can't remember if it was Godson's law or something else. But essentially, the law is that if you have a debased coinage in circulation with a non-debased coinage, the debased coinage becomes the standard, which seems counterintuitive. But of course, if it's debased, it has less spending power. So you're obviously going to hoard the money with more spending power, which is less debased. So the West Saxon
Yeah,
coinage was being kept by people, whereas people were actively using the coinage with less silver in it. And so the Mercian lunettes kind of win out. And that's also to plug the Lindisfarne dig. It's one of Ethelred the First's, so that's Alfred's older brother who ruled Wessex. It's one of his lunettes we found on Lindisfarne, which is an island off the
wow.
Northumbrian coast. So it's really cool because, yeah, as we were saying, the Vikings have this whole reputation of coming in and destroying everything, and it's like an apocalypse. But then you do just find a coin from Wessex in Northumbria when all of this is meant to be going on. So it might be some kind of evidence of continuity of trade, or potentially that a Dane brought it up to Northumbria at that time and to Lindisfarne. We don't really know, but it's really interesting to find that item there.
Yeah, definitely. And then why do you think that coin ended up there? Do you think that was something to do with pilgrimage possibly, or trade, or maybe a messenger coming from Wessex? Why do you think there was a coin there?
That's a really good question. I think there's a few different explanations you can take. So one is sort of that it came there indirectly, so that there were multiple routes that it could have taken. So it changed hands several times. And in that context, you could see it in terms of trade, so that someone in Wessex was trading with someone in Mercia, who probably traded with someone else, and then that it made its way up there. Because even though Lindisfarne is a monastery, we tend to think, oh, monasteries, they're on an island, they don't want to be disturbed, they're in their own kind of spiritual world. But actually, the amount of things that you find on Lindisfarne, like a Scandinavian gaming piece, the community of St. Cuthbert that was there was incredibly important and influential, and had connections across, the insular world and to Scandinavia too. So it's that they were really involved. They were kind of economic powerhouses in their own right. They produced things, manuscripts, and they'd collect tithe tax from people around. So it's possible that it came in that way, that it was traded up and then ended up there. Pilgrimage is another possibility, that it was someone from Wessex who potentially was fleeing the violence. Of course, we know from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle there's a lot of battles going on in the 870s when the Danes are really pushing hard into Wessex. I think there's something like 8 battles that are fought between the Danes and Alfred and Ethelred, and that at that time someone fleeing decided to retire to Lindisfarne. It's possible. Or
Yeah,
maybe
possibly.
it was carried by a Dane, that it was given as payment, because we know that Ethelred and Alfred both paid off the Danes in Yavol, although later on they kind of start to call it Danegeld, that they paid them for peace, and that in that way it was given to a Dane, and then that this was one of the coins that wasn't buried in a hoard like a lot of Scandinavian coins were, but that came up to Northumbria because the Danes were in control further south in the Southern Danelaw. And then it's a bit more murky what happens in northern Northumbria, which again, to circle back to the Last Kingdom, that's what you see with Bamborough, is that it retains its independence, and that actually happened in history as well. Is that the Earls of Bamborough continued to be independent. The Danes were focused around Aelfwynn, which became Jorvik, so York today, and they you can see in the place names in Yorkshire huge amount of Old Norse influence, but once you get into my area of Northumbria past the Tyne, there's not as much Old Norse influence, and they retained a certain degree of independence right up until it was reincorporated, or I should say incorporated into the kingdom of the English. The English kings were dealing with the Earls of Bamborough, the magnates of Bernicia, this northern part of Northumbria. So it's really interesting what happened here. So it might have been some kind of trade agreement, tributary payment between the Danes further south, who had then got this coin from Wessex and then moved up into the Danelaw of the northern Danelaw around York, and then that they traded it on to the community of St Cuthbert, which is just across the headland from Bamborough, so where these independent earls were. It's really interesting. It's actually what I wrote my archaeology coursework on this one coin. So I can talk about it for a long time, but yeah, it is really interesting.
I remember you showed me, I think this was in Michaelmas, which is the first term in Cambridge. I remember you were showing me your dissertation and like your lovely pie charts that you'd created, or graphs, which took up most of the piece of paper. Like not the writing, just the graphs that you'd made to show coins.
At that point, yes, that was some of the Simon Coupland's work on coin hoards found in Frisia, and whether they match the annal records of when raids were occurring. So you can match how many raids there were in a certain decade to how many coin hoards were buried, and whether there's a correlation. Because someone else did that for Normandy during the 9th century, and they found there was no correlation. But in Frisia, there is a correlation, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, gotta get a chart,
Yeah,
charts are great.
Yeah, exactly. But with Beowulf, how many charts could you make in Beowulf? See,
You could make a ton of charts about Beowulf.
Could you?
But, yeah, I think so. So, for example, you can do something that Søren Sindbach did with the Vita Anscari, which is to make a nodal networks connections map, which is to look at all the places that are mentioned in the texts, and then to look at which place was connected with which other place, like how much travel there is mentioned from one place to another. So in that way, you can connect Scandinavia to Constantinople. You can connect it to the Mediterranean and all around the Irish Sea, because if it says someone went from Dorestad in Frisia to I think it's Birka, there's a woman that goes from Birka to Dorestad, and then you can connect Dorestad is then connected to the Frankish hinterland. It's connected to Ribe, to Hittebu in Denmark. They're connected to York and to Hamwich just through these connections. So you could do that in Beowulf as well. You could say Beowulf is a Gert. He's from Sweden. What does he do? He goes to Denmark, though, because Heorot is, it's among the Danes that he goes. There's the story of the Finnsburg episode in Frisia, so you can add that in. You can say there's a connection to Frisia. They're connected with one another, and other places that he goes. So you could make charts for Beowulf if you wanted to be really nerdy about it. You
to
could.
Be fair, that does actually sound quite interesting. And actually, to retract some of my previous statements, some of the things that I do find quite interesting about Beowulf is the fact that it is set in Scandinavia, in Sweden, in that area, which is interesting, because you think, oh, okay, so what did the Saxons want from their literature? Did they want stuff that was like the Battle of Maldon, that was more relevant to their home situation, or did they want these legends? What did they see as their myths? Was this and also interestingly about Beowulf is that it's written in a post-Christian, well, a world that has Christianity in it, whereas the text itself, the people don't know about Christianity. It's set in their kind of pagan past, which actually makes it not as old as some people think, because some people think, oh, it's got the pagan side to it, so it must be really old. But actually, it was someone, a later Saxon scribe, looking back to that time, which I would say
that is incredibly interesting. That's a really good point, because it's when you think about it in those terms, I think other scholars, earlier scholars, suggested that it was a pagan poem, but then there's like this veneer of Christianity over the top, right? That they just added in some Christianity, but actually it's such a fundamental part of the narrative, the kind of that he's doomed from the start, because live by the sword, die by the sword, as it says in the Bible. But
it's interesting because
it is interesting.
Sorry. I was gonna say that the narrator, he always invokes God and the Father, but Beowulf doesn't have that. Beowulf doesn't do that himself, which it's very interesting. But I don't think that means necessarily that it was it's a later layer of Christianity put on top, because I think it's inextricably linked to that, and we see it in other Saxon poems. So the Doom of the Rood is an inherently Christian poem, but it also uses themes that you get in literature comparable to Beowulf, such as the Björg, the doomed hill. You get those kinds of pagan motifs that are stylized, don't necessarily mean that it was from that time period.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think in Beowulf, some of the elements that are just so Christian, with Grendel, he's called the son of Cain and things like this. And it's the whole idea of,
Yes,
he's a
exactly.
monster coming from afar to get revenge because, it's like a devil kind of character. Whereas I think in a lot of the more pagan literature, you don't really have characters that are evil. It makes it more sympathetic to them. And I think that kind of manifests itself in Grendel's mother, who, her son's been killed by Beowulf, and that's why she attacks Beowulf. As revenge. That's quite an important motif in Germanic works of
Yeah.
literature.
When you say
What are your
Grendel's
now that
mum,
we're talking about? Yeah.
I was just going to say, when you say Grendel's mum, I always think there's in the ASNC department. For those of you who don't know, the ASNC department puts on a Yule play around Christmas time. That's kind of a historical sketch show, so a bit like Horrible Histories. That's a comedy but based on historical things. And one year they did a sketch that was Grendel's mum, but to the tune of Stacey's mom. So they had people singing like Grendel's mom has got it going on. So whenever someone says Grendel's mum, I just think that basically. So yeah, carry on,
Oh,
Hilbert.
that's great. I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to watch it. Yours truly also featured in the Yule play this year. Grace, were you in the Yule play?
This year, no, I wasn't, because I was in a
Oh,
play at another college. I was in a
no.
thespian play.
I was gonna
Cambridge
say because
thespian.
you're, the go-to ASNAC drama girl, and you weren't actually in the Yule play. This is highly disappointing.
No,
Did
I
you
know.
come to watch it though?
I might do it. Yes, I did. Of course, I came to watch it. I remember you did your
Okay.
sketch with James, where it was like I think it was a Michelin web type sketch, and I just remember you were
Yeah,
wearing
that's right.
armor. Yeah, it was
Ah,
good.
yes,
But
of
yeah,
course.
also
Of
the
course.
thing about Grendel's mum, that sketch, that was before I was at Cambridge, and so like I watched those plays on YouTube to think, oh, actually, Asnak sounds interesting, or these people sound fun. So there was lots of ways to get involved with Asnak. Even if you're not an Asnak yourself, you can watch the Your plays on YouTube. Yeah, which another really good
That's very
one. I
true.
don't know. I don't know which Yule play it is. If you can find it, Hilbert, it'll be good if you put it in the description. But there's a sketch which
I'll
is
have a look.
about. It's called Athelstan's Falafel Stand, and it's honestly the funniest sketch that I've ever seen. And it's about the different kingdoms. I won't spoil it too much, but yeah, look out for Athelstan's Falafel Stand.
You know what? I'm sure I'll be able to find that. I now need to be able to just say, Jamie, pull it up. But unfortunately, I don't have a Jamie to pull things up. So I'm just going to have to look for it myself.
Yeah, we'll do some googling.
But we will. I'll add it into the description.
Sorry, we were talking about Grendel's mum, and then I just went on a digression. Please
A
continue.
Yule play tangent. That's completely
Yeah,
fine. Honestly, I don't think what I was going to say about Grendel's mum was as important as plugging the Asnek Yule play. So it's
yeah,
completely fine.
yeah. And also, we did it. Well, I say we. The Asnax, it was free. You didn't have to pay for it, which is jolly good because we could have conned some money out of people, but it
Could,
was
could
it
you
was
con
free.
money?
No,
We
no,
we
I'm
would have
joking.
been millionaires right now if
Exactly.
we'd budgeted this properly. We would have done so well.
Yeah, we should maybe have the Last Kingdom sponsoring Asnac. That would be cool. That would be very cool.
Well, do you
Anyway,
know there is actually a donate button in the description? So if you want to
is there?
sponsor Asnek, no, there's not. There definitely isn't. But while we're talking about plays and other things like this, you may not know that Grace is herself an accomplished playwright. How did you get into writing plays, and what are your most recent works that you've been working on in lockdown? Because you've been quite busy, as I understand it.
Yes, I mean that is very kind of you. I've only done a couple of things. I'm not a playwright, but I'm a Cambridge thesp, as they say. Yeah, so in
What is a
lockdown,
thesp? I've heard you
a
say this
thesp.
term quite a lot.
So a thesp, it's Cambridge slang for a drama person, someone who does lots of Cambridge student theatre. If you know about Cambridge, Cambridge is a big place for student theatre and music and
It's very
comedy as well.
pretentious, in
Yeah, so
other words.
no, but it's very inclusive. So the Cambridge Footlights, they're a really big comedy society, and they produce big names such as Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Emma Thompson, Richard
It
Iowati,
well,
David Mitchell, Kit Treadwell.
of
Yeah,
course.
and yeah, so I'm Cambridge Thesp, and that's fantastic about Cambridge because you have this theatre which is such high quality directing and production standard, and the acting is phenomenal, as well as being able to have the world class academic side of it is just fantastic. It's amazing. Anyway, so in lockdown, my friend and I decided we were in a sketch show together last term, and I rang him and said, "Hi Henry, do you fancy writing a comedy play?" And so we wrote an hour comedy radio play that was put on by the Cambridge University Light Entertainment Society, and we did it to raise money for the Trussell Trust, which help food banks and give money to them, and they coordinate food banks across the country, because we thought that's the homeless people are having a really, I mean, they have a rough time anyway, but especially in coronavirus, when things aren't working properly, it's harder to get volunteers on the streets and getting people to food banks. They really need help now more than ever. So yes, we wrote a comedy called In the Nick of Time, which is a lovely light-hearted story about 4 Bletchley Park code workers from World War II who accidentally find themselves transported into the 21st century, and they have to get back before it's too late. Dun dun dun! And it has original music and songs there as well, and the cast are very talented and very funny. So it was an absolute pleasure to do during lockdown. So yes.
Of course, there'll be a link to that in the description, because it's on YouTube as well, right?
Yeah. So it was released on Cam FM, I think, a couple of weeks ago, or no, last week maybe. Yeah, and then we've decided to put it on YouTube as well. And I think there should be a link in that video as well that says where you can donate. So that would be amazing if people are able to do that. But yeah,
that would be really kind if people could. We're going to put the proceeds from this video on there as well. So if you can share this podcast around, then it's also helping to help out with the homeless people at the moment, and also to help out Grace's playwriting career. You know,
yeah. If there's
you can say we saw her here first on the History with Hilbert podcast before she was famous. That's right, we heard it. So what's your secret? How do you do it? How do you come up with a play? Is it completely random idea, or do you like brew on them for ages and then think? It's
just completely random. I think I don't know where the idea came from for In the Nick of Time. I just suddenly thought, actually, that would be quite funny to have 4 Bletchley Park code workers, because I'm from Buckinghamshire, and Bletchley Park, if you don't know about that, it's a centre where code breakers worked to decode the Nazi Enigma machine. Most famously, I think it features in The Imitation Game, which is a film with Benedict Cumberbatch in that came out a couple of years ago. So I thought I wanted to do something to do with that, because it doesn't really have much attention. But yeah, no, it just random ideas, random things. I read a lot of Shakespeare and a lot of poetry, so sometimes if I see things from there, then I'll just think, oh, actually that makes quite a good idea. But yeah, I just try to write as much as possible and write poetry, and the thing that just blows my mind in Cambridge is how talented everyone is. Like, I have so many friends who just write poetry in their spare time and just think, oh yeah, it's just a hobby. And I read it and I think, oh my goodness, this could get published. And I know so many amazing playwrights as well. I'm currently in my friend's play, and it's so beautiful. And really, if she was discovered by a producer, this could go like really, really big. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that there is just so much talent in Cambridge. And yeah, it's just such an amazing place to be, and everyone is so different and brings something unique to the table and to the industry. Yeah.
So I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Cambridge Footlights, for sponsoring this video.
Yeah,
it's quite a good promotion you did there.
Yeah, no, but not just the Footlights. I mean, like, there's loads of there's comedy, but there's also musical theatre. There's the Cambridge University Musical Theatre Society. I could plug them, and also the Marlowe Society. There's just so many things, whether it's in college-based theatre or uni-wide theatre. And also, I think I've just remembered that James Northcote, who plays Oldhelm, I think he went to Cambridge. I think he did drama in Cambridge, and that's why, I think he went to Queen's. I might have to check my facts on that.
The all-important question is which college he went to.
College. So
interesting.
Maybe, I mean, so many people go to Cambridge and go into acting. So yeah,
You hear that, Last Kingdom? Cambridge, good place to find actors.
Yeah. Me and Hilbert. Yeah, Hilbert can play a Frisian. I can play, I don't know. I was talking to you about
wanted to be older Aelfwynn, right?
Yeah. They need, because she's the actor that they use now is about like 10. So if in season 5 you need an older Aelfwynn who, is more independent and, just as Æthelflad maybe declining, there we go. I'm here.
I mean, your role as older Aelfwynn is going to be, oh look, I'm the new lady of the Mercians. Oh, Edward has put me in a nunnery. Bye.
Yeah, literally, I'll be in like one episode, but okay, bye. But hey, at least I'll get to be in the Last Kingdom and see Edward.
The most important thing.
No, all of them are just amazing. But yeah, anyway, so that maybe in my next play I should write something about Aelfwynn, because what could she have achieved? It's one of those kind of what if questions of history, that if Edward had left her where she was in Mercia, what could have happened?
I mean, likelihood is she probably, because she was still quite young, she probably would have been manipulated by powerful figures around her. That's unfortunately how it normally goes with child rulers. You could do a dramatic monologue set in the nunnery. She's just been put there, and she had all these ideas of grandeur, and she's just sat staring out the window. And then it ends with the abbess coming in and saying, "You're late for matins. Get downstairs and pray." I don't know.
Yeah, and I could like I could send it to Millie Brady and be like, "Hey, do you want to star in this thing that I wrote?" Or maybe I could do it. I don't know. We'll see.
Why would she star in it? She's dead by this point. Æthelflaed.
No, but like if I wanted to make it, if I wanted to get it out there. Anyway, whilst we're on this subject, I would like to plug Cadfael, which is amazing, and it's a historically accurate-ish drama that's, I think you can get it on possibly on YouTube, or there's DVD box sets around. But it's set in the Anarchy, which is the civil war between Stephen and Matilda in the 12th century, so just after the Norman conquest, really. And it's amazing because it's about this monk played by Derek Jacobi, who is an esteemed actor but also went to Cambridge. He was at St. John's.
No.
And the costumes are accurate, and the representation of like life there is accurate, and it's set in a monastery, and it's just so beautifully acted, and the dialogue is amazing, and it's a murder mystery, and it's got real historical sensibility, and it's just brilliant. And I think that also fostered my interest in doing ASNC, because it just really fascinated me, seeing this medieval world.
It's quite a classic at this point, right? Cadfael. It's getting on a bit, but it's still good. Like, I have good memories from watching it.
Yeah, it's from the 90s, so it's really. I think they went. I think channel, what's it called, the Drama Channel. They went through a phase of re-showing Cadfael. I think that's when I picked up on it when I was about 12. But yeah, it's
your go-to series now, right? Whenever you think, oh, what should we watch?
I was saying to you yesterday that if we can't decide what to watch, if we can't agree, now that The Last Kingdom was finished and we can't agree on what to watch, we'll say, shall we watch a Cadfael? There we go. I'm actually working on a screenplay of one of the novels of Cadfael at the moment, but I don't know where to go with that, because do I have to get rights for it to send it somewhere, or shall I just do it for fun? So currently I'm just kind of writing a screenplay. It's just such a joy. The books are amazing as well, so I really recommend looking into Cadfael for those of you who don't know what to do with your Last Kingdom void lives now. So yeah,
keep your eyes peeled, folks. We're going to see Cadfael 2. This time it's personal, a screenplay by Grace Beckett. Just get ready for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Coming to a screen soon. Brother Cadfael and Sister Aelfwynn return in a time-traveling adventure.
Yes, I can emerge. Yes.
There you go. You're welcome. I expect 50% of the revenues from this endeavour because of my great idea.
No, Hilbert, you're going to be in it. You're going to be playing Hugh Beringer, who's like the sidekick.
I'm not sure if I can pull off Hugh Beringer very well, as multifaceted as my talents are. I'm not sure that is within my capabilities, but I'll do my best.
Do you know what they do have? They do have accurate armor and swords and shields.
Oh, do they?
They do have, yeah, they do, and earrings. Cool. Not that I've seen any earrings in Cadfael, but I'm sure if they did.
What? I remember you became very annoyed about the fact that Æthelflaed's earrings were not historically accurate. Did you go away and learn much about Anglo-Saxon earrings?
No, but like I said earlier, it's just the fact that the craftsmanship, the costume designer team, and the costume designing is brilliant. She's clearly a very talented designer, whoever designed it. But I just felt that they could have done more research on the craftsmanship. And this is the thing about how it kind of just seems very like edgy and just not just not kind of indulgent in the state, and that suits the vibe of the show. That it's a fast-paced kind of action show, but I think it would be really interesting to have a series that was very indulgent in the costumes and the scenery, and done really well. I think that would really spark a lot of interest and do a lot of favors for Anglo-Saxon history, because I think one of the reasons why it's not studied widely is because it's hard. It's not quite accessible in the same way as like the Tudors are, that everyone knows about the Tudors. We know what they look like. There's so many TV shows that represent what it looked like, but in
like the Tudors.
like in the Tudors, or Wolf Hall, for example, or like the other Belinga, those kind of things. It's popular culture. It's in the mainstream. Whereas programs like The Last Kingdom and Vikings, they're very kind of like edgy, and they show a certain side to that society. Which is why I like Cadfael, because I think it's more balanced in what life was like. Rant over.
Things we can hope for season 5, I think, in The Last King. Let's hope, but I don't know. I feel like they've kind of chosen their aesthetic and they're going to stick to it.
Which is entirely fair, because that does suit the program. But I think there is a gap in the market. Maybe I can write it, a gap in the market for a show that does kind of explore an element of society in a more balanced way, or just it's very hard to imagine what society is like. And I think if there's more of a clearer path into what that world was like, there'd be more interest in the Saxon world, because clearly there is. The Last Kingdom has shown that, and I think it has been brilliant. Like Æthelflad recently has really been getting some attention from scholars and also from the media. When it was I think 2018 was the 100th anniversary of her death, and there were events in Tamworth and Gloucester. So Tamworth was where she died, and Gloucester was where she was buried, celebrating her life, and events through the whole of the summer. And I went to Tamworth, I think it was 2019, and I went to the castle, and in the gift shop they had a whole kind of Æthelflad section of like
and you loved it.
Yeah, I loved it. I have an Æthelflad pencil which I'm currently actually using to write notes, and an Æthelflad bag. So yeah, she's just getting the representation, or rather the attention that she deserves as an amazing and unique figure in British history. So yeah, long may that continue, but also hopefully more scholarship on Edward, because I think, as you said in your Edward the Elder video, he's kind of forgotten almost, that he not much has been done about him, but actually he's a very good king and very effective early medieval ruler, in the same way that Alfred is.
Yeah, it is a shame he kind of gets sandwiched between Alfred, because everyone knows Alfred, and then Athelstan, because Athelstan is well often seen as the first king of England. Certainly for the he's the one that unites all the remaining kingdoms, the bigger kingdoms, including Northumbria. I think if people are interested, I'd recommend Edward the Elder, King of the Anglo-Saxons, the Forgotten Son of Alfred, which came out, I think, earlier this year, book by Michael John Key, or earlier last year, I think. So I'd recommend that book on looking for Edward. Grace, what would you recommend to people who have listened to this and thought, wow, Æthelflaed sounds really interesting, I'd really like to learn a bit more about her? Where would you go? Maybe not The Last Kingdom as the first point of call? Or
No, I would really direct people towards the program that got me into Æthelflad, which is just amazing and full of details about her life, or as detailed as we can know, which is Michael Wood's documentary on her. It's a 3-part series. The first one looks at Alfred, the second one looks at Æthelflad with a bit of Edward as well, and the third one looks at Athelstan, and the series is called King Alfred and the Anglo-Saxons.
It is a great series. I think, is it from the 90s or the 80s? Like, it's a little bit old, but it's still really good. Or is it a new one?
This one was comparatively new. It's 2013, 2014.
Oh, okay. So it's a properly new one.
Yeah. Whereas Michael Wood, he's known for doing In Search of the Dark Ages, which I think is what you were thinking about. That's the 90s. And also Michael Wood, I was lucky enough to meet him when I was in year 13, and he's such a nice person. He's so genuine, and he was very flattered when I said, "Oh, I'm applying to study ASNC at Cambridge because of you," and he just seemed very humbled by that, and it was just so lovely to meet him. So yeah, shout out to Michael Wood, who is a lovely guy.
I should try and get him on the podcast in that case.
Yes, get Michael Wood involved. But Michael Wood, he's also done lots on. I think he had a Pokemon China recently. So he's not
Hmm.
just, and also the Trojan War. He's not just a Saxon historian. He's done a lot of things. Yeah, so watch this space. I think there's going to be more on Æthelflad to come. And certainly, if I go into academia in the future, depending on what I want to do, I would definitely write on Æthelflad because she is such an amazing figure, and I think that there were more gradually appearing more books on her. So yeah, it would be great to see where she's now got a new statue in Tamworth as well,
Hmm.
which is really interesting. Beforehand, I think they put up one in about 1918, which is her looking very kind of maidenly and very feminine, and holding a child and a sword, to kind of show the dual aspect of her character. Whereas this new
Right.
statue is really powerful. It's her in armor, and she's got her crown on, and she's holding a sword, so it's more the military aspect.
It's
So
interesting to track the different representations of her as society moves on. It's a lot of culture does influence academia. Like I was saying with the, Vikings showing shield maidens, and the whole feminist movement coming up, and then how that's influenced a lot of how we, or how academics have viewed a lot of the warrior graves, or the women who were buried with weapons and things like that. I think with the child that Ethelflaed's holding, it's meant to be Athelstan, right? Because she,
oh
she
yes,
sort of fostered him for a while. So it's like the kind of idea that she's holding England in a way, because Athelstan would become the first king that
yeah,
united all the kingdoms. So it's some
that
deep
is
symbolism. But you're
yeah,
right in
wow,
thinking that she did the dual aspects of being a woman. She was a wife, she had a child, she fulfilled that role, but also the military role with the symbol symbolized in the sword. It's an interesting way of
yeah.
looking at it.
But equally, I think with the fashion of nowadays is to look at her as being a warrior. I think that is very valid, but I also think it is, we shouldn't forget that as well. She was a mother, and she had
Mm,
this kind of dual aspect, and that makes her more remarkable. Um, so yeah, that's actually, and coming back to the point with Athelstan, that's something that I would quite like to see if there's a series 5. That I think that would be interesting to have Athelstan in the Mercian courts, because otherwise, I mean, is I think Alswith at the end of series 4 said she was going to take him back to his monastery, but I don't really see the reason
mm,
being. He may as well be there with Athelflad.
right.
Um, which and then
Yeah.
it's one of those, we don't know what the relationship between Athelflad and Athelstan was like. It could have been, she could have been like a mother to him, which it's just one of those things that if there was more known about people's these figures' personal lives, how interesting that would be. But it's one of those things that have just been lost to the mists of time, and it's not recorded. But it just, every now and again, you forget that they're actually humans, and they're real people, and they had
Mm.
real relationships, and they felt love. And sorry, that sounds really deep, but yeah, that's what makes them more remarkable, that they achieved all of these great military things with the Vikings, but actually they were real people at the end of the day, just like us, and not too different from us.
And that's one thing I do really like about The Last Kingdom, is that it brings the personal aspect. It really brings that across.
Yeah,
That these people were human. They're not just these names that we have surviving from the past, and that's it. But they were alive, and they felt things, and they went through tragedies, and they fell in love. They got sick. They died. They were murdered. They killed people. They felt things, and I think it's easy to lose track of that, especially when you're looking at something that happened over 1,000 years ago. But there was so much emotion then as well, that we can only guess at. And that's what I like about The Last Kingdom, is that it brings that aspect of things, even though it has to be manufactured in a way, because we don't know exactly what they were feeling and what happened. But I do really appreciate that about the show, that it
yeah.
does that. It brings that aspect alive in a certain way.
Yes, definitely, I completely agree. Yeah, yeah.
Well, Grace, unless there's anything else you want to say about Ethelfled, or Beowulf, or anything else, I think this has been really interesting. It's been really nice to talk to you about this and to get your point of view on a lot of different topics. Is there anything you want to leave viewers with about Ethelfled, last word, or a last suggestion?
If you told me about this, I could have prepared something really cool.
Yeah.
No, I just that she is a remarkable figure, and I really urge people, if they don't know what to do in lockdown, just to do some research on Æthelflad and go and visit places like Tamworth or Gloucester, and just just really, find out more about this period, the real life history, because it's so rewarding, and it's also so mysterious. So you kind of get the two. You're never quite satisfied that you know everything. But yeah, Æthelflad, a remarkable woman and leader, and just do research on her. I just cannot stress that enough. And do reading. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I feel very honoured to be asked on here. So thank you.
No, of course. Thank you very much, Grace.
Thank you.